Welcome to Government Contracting Weekly, sponsored by AOC Key Solutions Incorporated. Government Contracting Weekly is the only television program devoted exclusively to the competitive and dynamic world of government contracting. A world where coming in second place is not an option, but where principle-centered winning is the only approach.
Welcome to Government Contracting Weekly. I'm Hilary Fordwich, and we've got quite a show for you today. First off, you'll meet Jake Bittner, the CEO of Qlarion, who'll be sharing with us the latest trends in worldwide cyber threats. After Jake, a conversation that I had with Anthony Robbins, the Vice President of Federal for Brocade, regarding acquisition reform. Finally, Jim McCarthy sat down with Kent Schneider, the President and CEO of AFCEA, to discuss the unique obstacles facing small businesses today. That's a lot of ground to cover, so let's get right to it. Good morning and welcome to our segment where I have with me a local government contracting expert. And this morning I'm delighted to have with us Jake Bittner, the CEO of Qlarion. Good morning, Jake.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming in.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
And I'd love to ask some questions in terms of your background first for our audience, so they get a sense of where you've been, what are you bringing to the table. I know that you spent a number of years with SAP.
Yep, so my background is really, I spent about the last 15 years working with all sorts of government agencies on business intelligence and analytics projects. I've probably worked on over 100 projects throughout that time frame, just all the way from DoD to civilian agencies, state and local agencies, even some quasi-government agencies, but really the breadth of agencies working with all sorts of business intelligence and analytics projects has been my background.
And you have a background from Yale, so that we know that you're quite savvy, and you have a good education.
Yeah, that's true. I went to Yale, I played football there for
70 pounds lighter he was
70
then.
pounds lighter, yes.
Today, heavier
I've shed a few
yes.
since then. It's been a challenge as well. But yeah, that was my background. I came out of there and ended up working at MicroStrategy locally here for a number of years.
With Michael Saylor.
With Michael Saylor and that team. Came out of that kind of crew around the 2000 time frame.
Which is a very hot space to be in at that point.
It was, and it's remained hot, frankly.
Yes.
Things have changed.
But at that time, it was the only firm really doing much like that.
Yeah, that's true. But then things have grown. Ended up working for Informatica for a number of years, and then for SAP, Business Objects, for a number of years. And then about 3 years ago, we kind of spun off Qlarion off of a larger firm called Cadence Quest to refocus the business on government, and have been growing pretty rapidly ever since then.
What's a catalyst? I know a lot of members of our audience, they're entrepreneurs, they had their own firms, they founded their own firms, and people that haven't are aching to. Sometimes, what was your catalyst? What gave you the confidence, and why did you do it, and how did it go initially?
Wow. It was a tough decision. I mean, it's something I'd always wanted to do personally. It wasn't for me. It wasn't a moment of gosh, I just fed up with this or something. I need to go do this or that. It's something I just simply always wanted to do. And a lot of the steps in my career I had taken to prepare myself for this. Really, it was around being in business development and sales and learning what that was about, learning about execution, learning about how to be customer focused. I guided my career for the first 12 years or so around learning those skills, so that when the time was right, when I was ready, I was able to kind of go ahead and break off and do this sort of thing.
So you always knew you'd be founding your own firm?
I really wanted to. And the timing just worked out, situationally, with a lot of things kind of coming together, and it just made sense.
Great. So we wrote out a business expression about staying the course. Well, Jake has stayed the course, not just business-wise, not just professionally, but he also competes in triathlons, which is really quite some feat. Just give us a little bit of insight in terms of how often do you get to compete? And
yeah, not often enough. I do about 6 a year.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's a fair amount. It's a fair amount.
Because there's all the training.
There's all the training. The seasons aren't that long. Around here, of course, the weather has to be in a certain way for you to be able to compete in triathlons. It can't be too hot, because it's too hot, it's pretty miserable.
Yes.
Of course, half the year is too cold. But yeah, it's a lot of training. I train early in the mornings. I train on the weekends. I train in the evenings. It's tough to get it in. I also, I carry in the back of my car. Usually, in fact, there is out there today a swimsuit and everything ready to go. I know where the pools are around town. So if I'm visiting a customer over here, I can hop over at lunchtime and grab a swim and hop back in and go to another meeting.
And that's inspiring, and that keeps you energized for the day as well.
Yeah, it really does. It's competing. It keeps your juices flowing.
I do the sergeant's program in the morning, and one of the guys has a tattoo. Even the women do those tattoos that are on their ankle.
Yeah.
Is that from doing triathlons?
It is. It's from Ironman.
Ironman. Have you done the Ironman?
I did a half Ironman.
Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't. I didn't think I'd get half a tattoo.
Okay. I mean, we're not going to have you look at. We're not going to look at your ankles and check either way. Yes. So, and tell us a little bit about business intelligence in terms of your definition.
Yeah, so the simplest definition of business intelligence really is, from a business perspective, taking advantage of all the data that you have within your organization, creating a single, taking that data, bringing it together, creating a single version of the truth, and then analyzing that information and getting that analysis out into the hands of business people who can use that to make decisions. That's
versus
really
just masses of data that there is out of there. Actually, all the analytics that make it usful, beneficial.
I think that's really the key point. Is making sure that the business that all these projects have at their core a business focus. Oftentimes, we see customers or clients who get involved with projects who have devolve these projects into more IT-focused projects, and really business intelligence projects are business projects supported by IT. Mm-hmm. And so the IT portion, the technology is important, but really the business value's got to be what's behind
the
all
business
these projects.
proposition.
Correct. Yes. That's what drives these projects. And they're a simple definition, but they can become very complex.
And the complexity is what keeps you and everybody in business, and is what our government, the nation, and we all need.
Well, yeah, we need to deal with the complexity. The complexity, unfortunately, the complexity's got kind of a two-edged sword. I think in the sort of the government space. I think one, it is there and it needs to be dealt with. But I think a lot of organizations, out there, a lot of government contractors do view that complexity as a way to create, let's say, contracts that aren't necessarily aligned with the government's interest. That tend to oversell these types of projects. And therefore they end up with a bad reputation in the market, or not the firm, but necessarily business intelligence. Sometimes people think of it as very, very complex, very expensive, very risky, because oftentimes these projects are misunderstood, misallocated in terms of resources, and end up as failures.
More than 70% of business intelligence implementations fail. Why did they fail, and how do you go about things at Qlarion to ensure that they don't?
Good question. In our experience, most of the failure happens around the approach to the project. That people typically consider business intelligence projects to be just like any other IT project, take a typical sort of technology approach to these projects, when really they're business projects. And they need to be considered, the business approach, the business value needs to be front and center throughout the entire life cycle of the project.
So is it in the initiation then that the people that have initiated conducting a certain project haven't been a person with a business mind and a business strategy?
That's part of it, and it's maintaining that throughout the entire project. It's making sure that that it's not just about building the system. It's about making sure that the system is adopted and used by the thousands of users out there it's meant to serve. I mean, really, you have to end up changing the way these people do their business every day, right? So you're delivering data and analysis out to, let's say, 10,000 users. How are you going to make sure those 10,000 users use it every day? What are they going to change about the way they've done their things for years to make sure they adopt and become a data-driven organization?
So in other words, you can't just dictate for them to do something. It has to be user-friendly and
yeah, and it has to consider
consider
their needs from the beginning.
Yes.
And it has to consistently consider their needs throughout, and it has to reiterate those sort of things. Change management has to be a part of things. Also, ensuring, we often talk about people who have, the other big challenge in these sort of things is people tend to try and boil the ocean, build a huge system rather than delivering things incrementally, because that's what they're more used to in the IT world, whereas business intelligence really lends itself to being able to deliver incremental value.
So you're talking about it could be across the entire life cycle of business intelligence, but it also could be in silos.
Well, you really need to deliver an incremental piece of value. So in other words, we need to target a particular organization or a particular executive or a particular group and deliver something for them right off the bat within 90 to 120 days. You need to do that. It's a critical piece of success, of managing your success. And so a lot of folks don't take that approach. They take more of the, hey, we're going to go away for 6 months, 12 months, we'll come back and we'll show you what we've done, just keep paying the bills. That's not
collaborative at all.
No, that's a recipe for failure, and that's why a lot of these things fall down. Our approach is different. We come from, I mentioned we spun off 3 years ago from a larger firm. We had a commercial background, so we really bring to the government a commercial approach to this problem, which is much more business focused.
Business minded.
Correct.
Yes.
Much more business focused. In this where we talk about mission focused and mission oriented. we try to reorient the entire process around business value. So we think about delivering the projects not just on time and on budget, but also on value.
Perfect. Today, collecting data is not really a challenge for any organization. Most organizations, and including the federal government definitely, have probably more data than they can ever hope to deal with, cope with, or do anything with. Jake, your role at Qlarion is to help people make good business decisions with the data they have, use it for business intelligence purposes. So what are some of the comments that you have about big data, what people are doing with it today, the misconceptions, and where is it, the whole industry going?
Yeah, certainly big data is a big topic today, a very popular topic today. I mean, I think I get an email about an event every week. They probably go to one every week in our nation here. I think the big challenge, though, is that it is becoming more complex as the variety of data sources becomes larger, as the volumes become larger. There's more complexity there. But I think what's really at risk here is people still losing the focus on business value. We see a lot of people really diving into the complexity and worrying about, should I use this tool or this thing or that thing? And the reality is they're all great tools, but you should really make sure you have a business valid reason for analyzing that information. What are you trying to get out of it? What is the business in the first place before you start picking tools? People will, we'll see a lot of customers who will get a pressure from above to have a big data strategy, and they'll go out and buy something. And that's not a big data strategy, right? We went out and bought this, we went out and bought this appliance or this tool, or we got a team to work on this technology. That's not a strategy, right? What is the business value behind all this? Why are we doing this? Just because you have a lot of data doesn't mean you necessarily need to, that's going to drive your business by analyzing it. And I think that's the thing, we got to make sure we stay focused on what is the business value and not just analyzing data because it's data.
For the sake of it, yeah. And when you say about stay focused, one of the things this program focuses on is the keys to winning. For our regular viewers, Key Solutions is the force behind the program, delivers strategy, capture, and proposal support services. A lot of winning is about focus, being focused in the right places. What do you see are the keys to winning?
Well, I agree with that. I think that being focused is important. I think knowing where you're going to compete, where you're going to be successful, and where you're not going to be successful. In other words, when to walk away. Making sure that you have a set of criteria that qualify, the opportunities, the customers, the clients you're going to go after, and that you stick to those. It's hard. It can be hard. We're a small business. I understand, wanting to go outside of that sort of box. When you have an opportunity, and it's like, geez, should we go after it? But really, in the long run, you have to pick customers that will help you win the next customer, the next customer, the next customer, the next customer. That's what's building a business is about.
Repeatable, yeah.
Yeah, and so you don't want to stray too far from that, especially not too early. For us, we're a company that's very focused on business intelligence. A lot of folks say, well, why don't you guys, do this or do that and do the other thing, get involved in cyber or cloud or web development.
But you're focusing on what you do best.
Correct.
And what you had a successful track record on.
We know we can do this better than anybody else, and therefore we're going to stay there, focus, and grow in that space. And could we grow wildly in some other space? Maybe, I don't know. But I think staying focused is the number one thing. And then the number two thing to me is having the key resources, people. The ability, talent. I mean, the war for talent is on, and we're competing in it heavily every day. Believe me, we're constantly trying to think of what we can do to attract the best people, to retain the best people. It's our biggest expense, and it should be. Our people are fantastic, and I'm excited about them and our future employees.
Great. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Jake, and sharing some of the insights.
Yeah, it's been great to be here.
There's no debating that a process as massive as federal acquisitions is continually in need of reform. Here's what Brocade's Vice President of Federal, Anthony Robbins, had to say. Tell us a little bit about your role and about Brocade.
So I have responsibility for the federal business for Brocade. It's about 10% of the company's revenue stream. And we provide both solutions today for the government's data centers as well as their network infrastructure. The role we play today is helping them modernize both.
Right. And when you say modernize, that could be absolutely everything. We know there's a lot to be modernized. What are you really focusing on?
Well, it is. And so, the government is the largest consumer of information technology in the world by segment.
By any country.
By any country. Yeah. They spend tremendous amounts of money. And today they have all kinds of challenges relative to acquisition, the kind of money that they spend, and where commercial best practices are going and how they align.
So if anybody doesn't like the way the government's operating, so they come back to Brocade and it's kind of your fault, no?
Well, I think the whole vendor community and systems integrators are all responsible for helping the government spend money in a wiser way.
Right, and I think it's a wonderful role you're playing. So that accounts for some of your success to date.
It does. I think, we focus on the market as kind of thought leaders and try to say, okay, how do we help support the citizens or warfighters alike? How do we support the mission? Right? And whether or not we have products that solve to that, we try to help the government solve to the problem that they have. And I think if you approach it that way versus peddling boxes, you serve this customer in a much better way.
Right. Well, as you can see from Anthony's comments about the fact that Brocade is not peddling boxes, he has extensive experience in this arena, and particularly he can contrast the sophistication of what Brocade is doing for the government now versus a lot of the other competitors and/or firms that he's seen along the way. So the other thing I'd love to ask you about is not just your professional background, but you're a large man. We can see that you're a football player, and talk about your football background, your basketball background, the sports that you love, and your sort of personal interests.
Well, I appreciate that. So I played basketball in college.
Yes.
And I was fortunate enough to get an athletic scholarship. So I graduated on time and free.
Yes.
So that was a big deal. And I try to remind my kids of that all the time today to try to help me save money, given that I do have 5 kids.
Right.
And I have 2 currently in college.
That makes a huge difference.
Yeah. And then I like how sports shows up in the business world, because it's all about teamwork, goals, communication, achievement, and the like. And so I find a lot of times that folks on our team with sports background do very well in the business world.
Yes.
So it's interesting.
Yeah, and they love sports analogies. I know any speaking and coaching, they love to hear you give a sports analogy and they're all lies are alike if you deflect to a sports analogy. I'm sure you use that in your leadership.
They do, and especially on the Beltway here in D.C. with the Redskins and the Ravens and the Nationals.
Yeah,
and
the Caps
Orioles
and right.
So much more.
Yeah, great. The position of Vice President at Federal at Brocade, Anthony is in a position where he sees a lot about the acquisition process. He's also got some recommendations for us, which I think is very valuable. So if you could really, Anthony, share with our audience, what do you think the government should be doing?
So a couple of recommendations. So today, the federal government's acquisition process is not very well aligned to how commercial technologies are being brought to market. So our recommendation is to make sure that the acquisition community gets its staff trained and skilled, and its acquisition process set up to acquire everything as a service. So whether it's cloud, infrastructure, security, or whatever it is, all of the R&D roadmaps of all commercial IT companies are being oriented to deliver all products and services and infrastructure as a service. The government's acquisition model is not ideally set up to do that.
Right, unfortunately, and it hasn't been. And then what about in terms of what you're doing and what you're seeing in terms of the acquisition process as it is today, given that it's not going to change as you recommend and as we would want immediately? What are you doing to be as really as successful as you are in the current milieu?
Well, there's a couple of things. So first of all, we're trying to bring products to the government in a way that they can consume them in a way that also supports the commercial best practices. So we come up with financial products today that are just as important as the hardware or software solutions that we brought to market yesterday. And the idea is that we can get the government on commercial best practice models and allow them to deal with their current budget challenges in just a very changing and chaotic time.
And when you say budget challenges, you've mentioned before that there's a lot of growth in the IT acquisition funding anyway, and that's going to continue. Yeah,
and the budget challenges I refer to as the whole OpEx versus CapEx model. That's one piece, the color of money. The second piece is just the contracts, and are they set up to acquire services? GSA has made some progress, still more progress to be made. The other thing is just the length of time that it takes to go through the trade studies, RFIs, RFQs, RFPs, and how that aligns to commercial practices. And right now it's just misaligned.
Anthony's addressed a little bit about the misalignment of where the current procurement process could be But also, we all know there are many misconceptions and misperceptions about the IT market in general. So I think you're also in a good position to talk about what is the marketplace really like compared to what a lot of people in the marketplace might think it is.
So I think there's a lot of opportunities in the space to serve our customers really well. So I think the topics that the government is dealing with are all the right ones, right? They're trying to figure out how to do acquisition reform, and progress has been made. GSA's been behind a lot of that. They're trying to get oriented to do cloud and infrastructure-like buys.
And actually, we have a lot of people on the show who say that it's amazing how fast government is actually moving now and how quickly that's changed.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And so a lot of progress has been made there. Still progress to make. In the area of data center consolidation, absolutely the right topic. Progress has been made, more work to be done, and there's some agencies that are doing kind of best in class, or what I call commercial best practice, like execution relative to data center consolidations, and also the work in cybersecurity. There's a lot of great work going on in security. The government spends 16% of their IT dollars in the area of security, cybersecurity being the biggest threat that affects our nation, just not the government. So the government's playing a role in advancing how we do cyber in the federal government, but also how that impacts commercial companies as well.
Right. And then do you see that all the federal-facing work that you're doing, are you seeing that everybody's at the same kind of pace, or would you say that there are other agencies, there's some that are excelling also in terms of
No, there's
that?
a range, right? So
Yes.
there's some really neat work going on in the U.S. intelligence community, for example, that's not happening in DoD, and the same in civilian agencies. So civilian agencies are making progress as it relates to e-health or cloud and infrastructure as a service. The Department of Defense has been modernizing legacy systems at an increasing and improving rate. So progress everywhere.
That's good. So Brocade has had the opportunity to testify, particularly your CEO in the FATARI legislation, and you're really a global company, and they wanted the government wanted a different perspective from your organization. Tell the audience a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. So we're a $2.5 billion company, 4,600 employees, global organization, and we spend a lot of money each year on research and development. And so we play a big role in revenue from the federal government today, but we're not as big as some of the other players. And I think they wanted to hear from folks that spend a lot of money on R&D, that knew the government well, and had a voice relative to where the government might go. And so our CEO testified before the subcommittee.
Right, a different perspective, which is always very healthy, and it's good that they did that.
That's correct.
Yes, and then what about in terms of, the force behind the show, our regular viewers know is Key Solutions that provide strategy capture and proposal support services to government contractors. So we're always interested in what are the keys to winning. We know our audience loves to know that. Everybody wants to win a government contract, of course. So what do you view, Anthony, at Brocade, are your keys to winning?
There's a couple of things. So first of all, you have to understand the mission of the government. As they said, whether it's serving citizens or warfighters, you've got to understand the mission, and you've got to relate to how you enable the mission to work very well. Then you have to understand the acquisition process. What contracts do they use and the like. And to the extent that you can provide best value in the environment today, I think you have an outstanding opportunity to serve this customer very well.
That's great. And then what about, for our audience's sake, we always also like to ask, were you looking for teaming partners as well? I mean, what do you look for?
Well, there's a couple of things. Our route to market is kind of what we call indirect. So we align to the OEM partners like IBM, EMC, Hitachi, Dell, and HP. In addition, we work with the systems integrators because the vast majority of IT spend goes through the systems integrators. So you've got to know the systems integrator community. And finally, the classic channels, VADs and VARs and the like, well, they hold all the contracts today.
Yes.
Manufacturers like us very seldom anymore hold GSA schedules or ITES, NetSense contracts. So you've got to work with the classic channel partners. You've got to align to the systems integrators, have coverage on the OEMs, while at the same time understanding how the end user agencies want to acquire their products, serve their customers, and do it in the budget that they have.
Right, perfect. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us, Anthony, and being here today.
All right, it's been my pleasure. Thanks for having us.
We all recognize that in today's environment, small businesses are facing unique obstacles. Recently, Jim McCarthy of KSI sat down with Kent Schneider, the president and CEO of AFCEA, so that we can all better understand this critical and timely issue.
Many of our audience are comprised of small businesses, and so I'd like to ask you a question about small businesses. And essentially, in your view, what are the biggest obstacles that confront small businesses as they participate in the acquisition process?
I think it really comes down to two things. First, how does small business get visibility with government? You know, there are tens of thousands of small businesses that are registered to do business with the federal government just in the IT space alone. So how do they get visibility out of that crowd with the people who are making buying decisions? And then the second part of it, I think, has to do with how can you streamline the system so it's not so expensive. I've worked with many small businesses that run out of money and time before they can get through the entire process. You know, large companies are used to working within the government framework. Small businesses sometimes don't have the wherewithal to do that. So I think, first of all, in terms of visibility.
What's the key to getting that visibility, in your view?
Yeah, so I think the key there is to find mechanisms to bring government and small business together. And so we try to do that in AFCEA through events, sometimes through other communications means, through exhibitions where small businesses can display the things that they're doing. The government just doesn't have time to deal with small business on a one-to-one basis, so it has to be done in numbers. And
hence one of the roles of your association.
Hence one of the roles that we provide.
You mentioned streamlined procurements and acquisitions to help small businesses. What are your thoughts on that? What did you mean by that?
Well, that's harder because that's really all about government. Government's got to figure out a way to come up with an expedited procurement method for small business, much like they do with 8As. But the problem is that 8As comprise such a small part of the small business community. If they could figure out a way to come up with an abbreviated procurement process similar to what we do with 8As, but to do it for all small business, maybe under a specific dollar threshold, then there would be the opportunity for small business to do it within their means.
And I assume that AFCEA is working with both partners, government and industry, to bring about the streamlined approach.
We are. We use workshops and other kinds of forums to do that. But I will tell you that progress is slow, and this is an issue that's been worked for many years.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Kent. Thank you.
We certainly packed a lot into today's show. Our thanks to Jake Bittner, the CEO of Qlarion, for discussing the latest trends in worldwide cyber threats. To Anthony Robbins, the Vice President of Federal for Brocade, for his thoughts on reforming the acquisition process. And lastly, but not least, Kent Schneider, the President and CEO of AFCEA, regarding obstacles facing small businesses today. And thank you for making Government Contracting Weekly a part of your regular learning experience. See you next week.
You've been watching Government Contracting Weekly, sponsored each week by AOC Key Solutions Incorporated. Government Contracting Weekly is the only television program devoted exclusively to the competitive and dynamic world of government contracting. For additional information, comments, questions, or suggestions, please write us at governmentcontractingweekly.com.